Hi, podcast listeners. Welcome to the A World of Difference podcast. We have so many guests on this show making a difference in our lives, making a difference all around the world with the expertise that they bring. And yet so many of you are reaching out to me saying, you want more. It's not enough just what we're putting on these podcast episodes for you. And so I am here to extend a very warm welcome to you to our Difference Maker community, where you can join for as little as $5 a month to get all this extra content. Out the gate, you're going to get 30 plus minisodes of exclusive content not available for the regular podcast listeners, and an exclusive minisode every month. And you'll get exclusive voting power to help us pick podcast topics and more. And that's at our Changers tier. There's 3 different main tiers and then an extra larger tier. But whatever tier that you join at, you will be included in this extra content. And I know that many of you are wanting to go a little bit deeper. And so even though it gets a little wild in there sometimes because of how deep we go, I want you to join us there. This extra content is very special. It means a great deal to me to be a part of this community with you. And I would love to just exchange ideas or perspectives that you have around these different episodes. And that's the place where we do it. So please show up to our Difference Maker community. Give us $5 out of your pocket every month. And I think that you'll have a lot of fun in there because we do. And I would love for you to join us. So go to patreon.com/A World of Difference to join us there. Welcome to the A World of Difference podcast. I'm Lori Adams Brown, and this is a podcast for those who are different and want to make a difference. Our guest on today's show is Jenny Booth Potter, who is a creative producer, storyteller, and co-host of The Next Question, a web series about expanding our imagination for racial justice. She's on the show today talking about her new book, Doing Nothing is No Longer an Option, One Woman's Journey into Everyday Anti-Racism. Jenny has co-led racial justice trainings across the country in the U.S. for churches and organizations, and is a founding partner of Herself Media, an organization that aims to create stories that empower and bring joy to Black women. Jenny and her husband make their home outside of Chicago with their 2 boys and 1 wild puppy. We are so excited to welcome to today's show, Jenny Booth Potter. Hi, Jenny. A very warm welcome to the A World of Difference podcast today.
Thanks, Lori. I'm really excited to be here and looking forward to our conversation.
I am too. So you're there in Chicago, and we're recording this on November 9th. And yesterday was a really big day. We don't know all the results, but tell us how your day went yesterday.
Yeah. So my day yesterday was full. I actually served as an election judge about 10 minutes from my house. So the night before the polls opened, I got to our it was at like a apartment complex rec room. Like that was the polling place, and got there and set up and met the other judges. And then the day was just slammed. We had such a great turnout. It was my first time working on an election, like in that capacity. And everyone else that was with me this was not their first rodeo. And so they were commenting on how many people, that really felt like record turnout. And it was just exciting. It felt like a really, looking back, it felt like a wise place to be, because I couldn't really be on my phone. I had to be like serving people as they were attempting to vote. And that just felt like, it felt like I was putting my body where my beliefs are, that I want people to be able to show up and choose people to represent them well, and to be respected as they do that, and to be honored as they do that. And so, there were a few like ruffled feathers throughout the day. Different things didn't work, but overall it was a really beautiful day. But I'm in Illinois, and we had some exciting results in our area that are kind of boosting me this morning, of giving me a little hope we have an Illinois state senator who is she's 3 years old.
I read
She's a
that. The
Muslim woman.
youngest.
Yes,
Yes.
she's the youngest to ever serve. Yes, so that's my like we got to vote for her, and
Yeah.
so that was really exciting and just like yeah, this I want to be represented by this woman, and I get to. So
That's
yes,
so exciting. I actually read that news to my oldest. I have an adult son who's 18, and I read it to him this
okay,
morning. I was like, Gen Z, they're making it into the levels of government. He was just so excited. There was, I guess, a 25-year-old somewhere that's going to be in the Congress, I saw. So,
yeah,
yeah, we're getting
I
our
think
first
he's
Gen Z.
Florida.
Hmm. Florida.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's exciting. New generation coming up. I'm excited to see these kids in the United States lived through Sandy Hook and Parkland. And, I think so many things they've gone through COVID and their generation that has marked them. I'm interested to see how they, not only how they vote, which my son was able to vote for the first time with me
Oh,
yesterday, which
cool.
is fun for us. I feel like I've voted on his behalf for years, policies that affect him, even when I lived overseas. I have my kids in mind when it comes to education policies and all kinds of things that affect the younger generation, but now their own voice can be heard, and it's exciting. It was exciting
Mm,
to vote with my son, and he was excited to be asked what his opinion was, which is pretty cool. So I'm glad you did that, and your book is all
totally.
about action, so I'm sure that felt really good to do something. Yeah.
Yes, yes, it did. It did feel like yeah, putting my beliefs into practice, which I think is vital, right? Otherwise, like if we have beliefs and they don't, I mean, that's like biblical, right? Like that's like what we're talking about, this idea of if you have like love, but you have no, yeah, if you have no action, like what's really backing up your words? Like so yeah, it really did feel yes, I know you just gave me a segue to my book. Yes, the title of my book is Doing Nothing is No Longer an
Let's go
Option.
for it.
And
Yeah.
so, yes, so I kind of do really look at the lens of the world through those words of like, okay, I obviously cannot control the results of the entire midterm election, but I can
Yeah.
show up at my local polling place and try to be a representative and an advocate for justice and equity and equality by making sure that people, especially people of color that were coming to my polling station, were respected and were believed that they are who they say they are. Just all you hear
Hmm.
terrible stories of
Yeah.
discrimination at the polls, and so it felt like a very ordinary don't want to say easy because it was like 8 hours of training before I went, and it was like a lot. But in the
Yeah.
scheme of things, it's a really easy, low stakes way to be practicing what I believe,
Yeah.
and that yeah, that really is the heartbeat of what my book is about.
Yeah, totally. My Twitter feed was full this morning of people just talking about their experience yesterday, waiting in long lines. I guess they're saying if you wait longer than 10 minutes like that, it feels like that's not acceptable because people work and we don't have a week to vote. We just have a day. And then,
Right.
there's the whole way it's district and certain areas, like if there's a bunch of white people in an area and it feels more kind of like a certain kind of demographic, they're probably going to have an easier
Hmm.
time. And then people
Yep.
in other types of communities that might vote differently have these really long waits. And so it's not equitable. I mean, here in California, it's so easy. We're one of the states. I think there's like 8 states where they just automatically mail the
Hmm.
ballots to all the registered voters. So it's so easy for us. You could have mailed it in way ahead of time, but my son and I wanted to like do it on the day because it's his first time, and so filled it all out the night before, and then just walked in. There was no line at this little box. You just put it in, and it's
Yeah.
like all official. But I know everywhere isn't like that, and that is part of the racism in our country. So help us understand a little bit about that for those maybe overseas who don't understand it.
Oh yeah. I mean, I think gosh, you can't really talk about America accurately without talking about like if you want to talk about origin story, our origin story is steeped in in racial injustice
Yeah.
and in racism. Whether it be literally like the people groups that we displaced or just full on executed to people from African descent who were brought over here, forced to work against their will, dehumanized for hundreds of years, not equity, I'm sorry, money, like,
Right.
financial equity is built
Right.
up for the white people, and a white supremacy is seeping in that because, slavery benefited anyone who was white, and it benefited most, least percentage wise, it like benefited people financially. Like, there's like, it's not like every person that was living in the South had enough money to like own other people as property,
Right.
but by the creation of slavery, they were able to have other jobs that were perpetuating that system and that institution.
Right.
um I mean, the whole idea of race as like a construct was introduced because we've always had slavery throughout history. Like, America didn't invent slavery, but what America did and what that time did was it created a very clear marker for how to tell if someone was likely owned versus someone that was like an indentured servant from Europe. And so race was kind of the construct of how do we mark people, because we already want to dehumanize people to exploit them and make money. And now here's this new way we can do it because we've decided to bring people from this country or this continent where skin color is a very like easy recognizable marker, and so
Mm-hmm.
we'll go with that and then build off from there. So yeah, you look back at how our country was started and how systems were, you think about even, well, we're just talking about this election day that happened yesterday. Well, for the first, I'm not great at math right now, but for the first, what, 200 years of our 150 years, like, voting was not something that was afforded to all people in this country. And obviously, we had to like keep adding amendments to allow white women, and then we're allowing black men but not black women. Like, there's just so many um iterations of like trying to make right what was started off very wrong. And it's really slow going, and it's ongoing. The themes from our history are still very present today, and I think it's very important to see that thread, that continuum throughout, because it helps you understand, when you have a framework of our history, it helps you understand why protecting things like the Voting Rights Act is so important, because you understand what was happening to especially Black Americans in this country before they were protected, before they didn't have to take ridiculous tests, or be really like harassed or arrested for even trying to vote or register people to vote. So it just the narrative of racism is such a through line in our country that it's almost um, I think it's one that's been like shelved for a really long time, especially in my background. I was born in 1982. So this was like the golden era um, of like focus on the family was kind of coming on the scene. And it was really this like colorblind mentality of how like, so we're not going to tell people like the racialized narrative of our country's history. We're just going to like not talk about race at all. And I think for a lot of people, once you started poking at that, you realize like, oh my gosh, this affects everything. Like, this isn't just one aspect of the American life. Like, it's like inescapable, no matter what institution you're participating in, what like faith community you're participating in, where you live, where your kids go to school. Like, it really does touch everything. I heard this great quote, and I can't remember who to attribute it to, but they said, racism isn't the shark in the ocean. Racism is the water itself. And I think that is the most accurate way I can describe American racism. Is it's like, we think it's going to be this like scare, like this obvious predator thing with like Jaws music playing underneath it. And it's not, it's the water. It's everywhere. It's in everything. So, and I've never lived abroad, so like I can't say how that necessarily compares, but I will just say that that is not the message that they tell you growing up in American school systems or in a white evangelical church. Like I was not learning that racism is the water. I was learning that racism, God didn't like racism, but I didn't even have language for that until I was in my 20s. Because that just was not what we talked about. And that was very much on purpose.
Yeah. It can be almost its own version of having to re-educate yourself in some circles, and I think a lot of people are in that space right now. We do have so much being written in the last many years by including other voices, both Black Americans who are so affected by this for so many generations, carry the trauma in their own bodies, according to the research we see from how trauma can be passed on for generations, and how trying to figure out what happened to them and their own ancestors, and how
Mm-hmm.
and what that means for us going forward, how we can find a better way. But it also means that even if if you're a white American, for example, and maybe like you mentioned, your family didn't own slaves per se, understanding the privilege that you still had um, all these generations later, and still have, because of how systems have worked for your family for many generations. I mean, just not having been redlined as a family is a whole different experience, or I don't
Yeah.
know. I recently found out New York City's Central Park used to be a largely Black neighborhood, and there's a
Mm-hmm.
whole museum around what it would be like if it hadn't been destroyed and made into Central Park. There's just some people think it's only in the South in the United States, but there were terrible things that happen everywhere, even here in California. It used to
Mm-hmm.
be Spain, which colonized Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
And, there's just things that happen with the missions that were brought in, indigenous people. And there's just, Japanese Americans, Chinese Americans. There's just so
Yeah,
many things that went on. In addition to the enslaved peoples brought over from Africa into, a lot of the South. So,
completely. And you even look at the framework of the impact on the like global oppression. Like I feel like it was not that long ago that I learned that Hitler modeled, um, like concentration camps and even before that, just modeled um, his anti-Semitism, anti-Jewish, just the scapegoating of the Jewish people as a means to collect power. He based a lot of that of how Black Americans were treated in America. And so you just see nothing is really like new. Like it's all just like borrowed implementation of oppression and hatred and supremacy and blame. But it's not, and so it manifests in the details are unique, but the symptoms and the ideology behind it is all very much caught from the same from the same mindset. And um I think that's important because I think a lot of times when we start saying when we start introducing other oppression, I think it's very easy for people to almost want to be like turning it into the oppression Olympics and be like, okay, so let's just like cut to the chase. Was it harder for is it harder for Black people, or was it harder for like, yeah, like Japanese internment camps and they lost everything and or was it harder for indigenous people? Or, what about anti-Semitism and is on there, that, there's a whole chapter in my book called White Noise, and it's based on I am a mom of two young kids, and one of the first things that they often have you register for is a white noise machine because they're like, listen, you're going to need this thing
yep.
because you're going to be like wanting to do dishes and your baby is going to wake up and you need something to kind of, drown you out and keep them asleep. And the language, I mean, it just like was very helpful because I was like, oh, white and noise. And that is what we have so often is we have white, like, yeah, like these thoughts that are very pervasive and that white people often swallow very easily. And those are things that are usually meant to not incite further curiosity or exploration or compassion or imagination or anything that would like wake you up and keep you excited. It's things that are supposed to like slow you down and make you sleepy and tired and just want to take a nap, right? And I think, and I know this wasn't like what you were doing or what you were saying, but I think in my conversations, especially when I was first kind of starting my anti-racism journey and trying to talk to white friends, that was so, I was hearing so much white noise in response. This like,
Mm,
well, yeah, but what about the Holocaust? And yeah, well, people, slavery has, read the Bible. Slavery's always been around. It wasn't just Black people.
right.
Or what about this group? Or what about this group? And none of that excites the conversation. None, it, the comparison game is not what we're interested in when we're talking about oppression, because it's just gonna, I think it's helpful to recognize it's just manifesting itself in different ways. And those ways matter because it affects real people and real lives and their, they matter. But we don't need to be pitting them against each other, trying to decide who had it worse. I think that's, um, yeah, I think it's a tactic that keeps people divided as opposed to saying, hey, I've been oppressed in this way and you've been oppressed in this way.
Yep.
Let's stand together and fight that oppression together, not because mine was worse or because none of that, but because oppression is bad. Like it's just
Yeah.
like, I wish I could probably come up with a better, jazzier way to say that, but like, yeah, like oppression, it's not good for the oppressed and it's not good for the oppressors. And so
Right.
we don't want that. We want something else. And I wish I saw more of that. I wish I saw the ability for people, and I will say I do often see that in oppressed groups that I belong to. There is an understanding of, you are not my competition, other person who has experienced oppression. Like, we know what this feels like. But we always have a choice, right? If our who we're gonna like align with.
Yeah.
And we all have privileges in different ways. And so there's always ways we can be accessing that privilege and accessing those people maybe that are like more in positions of power. Um, but man, what a more exciting, beautiful, lovely world to live in if we said, not, yeah, if we had that kind of philosophy of being able to see, um, not just not just commonality, but like a common, yeah, common, like shared pain so that we could experience shared and collective healing. I think that is something that we are in desperate need of. And I think, um, we're just seeing so much sickness and so much brokenness, and a lot of our responses are just furthering, they're not helping us get better or get well or get healed. And um yeah, and I want that. Like I want that for the kids that I'm raising. I want that for myself. I want that for communities that I care about. And yeah, yeah.
Yeah. It's one of the things I observed and have observed being here in California. We have so many different a long history of immigration and then
Mm-hmm.
colonization and um, in the recent immigration too, just around tech. I live in Silicon Valley, and there's just a
Oh wow.
whole different. You just meet all different kinds of people, different cultures, foods, languages, all the time. And one of the things that I think that I observed, I was here, I'd been in the States just a short while when everything happened with George Floyd. And one of the things I noticed was,
Mm,
I mean, I actually went to a protest with an Asian American woman, her husband, and her kids. And it was, there's this scarcity mentality that I hear from a lot of people in California and from other parts of the United
mhm.
States where it's almost like there's only one seat and everybody's fighting for it, or there's only one limited
Yeah.
amount of resources. So it's like, well, if you were from an ancestor came on a slave ship and was enslaved here in a forced labor camp, that's sort of like that's the absolute worst situation, and it is probably. I mean, I don't.
Mhm.
We can debate that, but I just feel like, indigenous lands being stolen is horrible. Putting those kids in camps and slaughtering their people and wiping them out completely in some cases, pretending they don't even exist. Like all of it's just bad. Like why does one have to
Yeah.
be worse? But at the same
Right.
time, I think it was really encouraging to see, I guess with what had happened in LA back in the 90s was some of the like Asian American population was sort of pit against the Black American population as if they
Right.
couldn't both have problems to fight together with. But I think that,
Yeah.
we're seeing some of that myth of the scarcity mentality broken down where it's like, this table is big enough. Like all of these voices
Mm,
can all have suffering and oppression and pain, and in fact if we band together we're stronger than if we fight each other for
yeah.
these situations. I'm actually preaching on Sunday in Oakland at a church that's was started by
Mm,
Japanese Americans a long time ago,
mm,
and it's still largely Asian American, a lot of Chinese Americans in the church, and they, after George Floyd, decided they wanted to focus much more on social justice, in particular around the Black
mm.
American community and how they could help. But it doesn't mean Japanese Americans weren't in internment camps, and those stories are still alive and all that too. And then they're bringing me in as a white woman to preach on social justice on Amos because they want to hear a lens of women and what it's like to fight for rights for
Mm,
women as Christians. So like it's just, I think it's a beautiful example that the
yeah.
table's large. Even the LGBTQ community, like all of those letters, instead of being pit against each other, like who was bullied
Mm,
worse in school. I see it a lot among the trans and
mm,
detransitioning community. It's like it's okay to both have pain. It's okay to both bring your stories, and we
yeah.
don't have to fight each other. So I love that you're bringing that up and that you talk about that in your book. I know that doing something is so important to you. So if somebody's sitting here and that's new for them, how would you help them kind of
Mm.
understand what you can do in terms of linking arms with people?
Yeah. Oh, I love literally everything that you just said. And I've never made that connection with the like LGBTQ, like thinking about the importance of each of them being represented, but it's not like a hierarchy, right? It's not like a pyramid where it's like, well, L is at the top and like like um I think there's something I think there's really something beautiful to learn in that of the like different facets um of what belonging to that community looks like, and then the ability to handle diversity of experience, even even in or varying layers um of pain, of oppression, of legal obstacles. I mean, I think you can't have conversations like the ones we're having without understanding that like none of us, like we all have privilege and we all experience oppression, and it's figuring out um how to like I love what you just said about the scarcity mindset, and I promise I'll get to your question in a minute, but I think there's so much to. I remember the first time someone said to me, I feel like we can basically like summarize racism by talking about scarcity versus abundance mindset. Because if you have a scarcity mindset, you just think there's like eight pieces of the pie and I have to make sure that I have one of those pieces. And so I will do whatever it takes. I will steal, cheat, lie, dehumanize, whatever, because there's a finite amount, as opposed to there is enough for everybody. There is enough. Like even just saying it, I feel better. Like
Yeah.
I feel rooted in that, and I believe that like there is enough. Um, so I would say I think a lot of white people who maybe had been raised similarly to me, or just even even not, I don't think you needed to come from a colorblind 1980s focus on the family childhood to be really rocked by 2020, to be rocked by the murders of Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor and George Floyd. Um, and so I do think there was an earnest, like lots of almost like mini conversions for a lot of people of way of saying, I once was blind, but now I see. Like, I
Mm.
see it now. I see it now. I couldn't see, oh my gosh, I couldn't see it before, and I see it now. And that's so important. And that's so beautiful. Like, to be able to grow in your ability to see what you once couldn't. And so
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a really important step for so many people.
Yeah.
And I think what I have come back to, I started this work as a college student, and by the work I just mean like figuring out my role as a white woman in the world who cares
Mm-hmm.
about racial justice. Like, what does that
Yeah.
mean? And I started this work when I was 21, and I just turned 40. And so when I was watching the summer of 2020, and I was watching what I believe were earnest moments for white people of waking up, the image that came to my mind was of a window that had just like been like blown wide open. Like, it was like shut. It had been like, like caution, like don't go here. And all of a sudden it was like wide open. I was like, oh my gosh. But that's not where the image stopped for me. The image was, how long is this window going to stay open before it starts closing? How long are people going to be interested in having conversations around defund the police and Black Lives Matter and reparations and, just like equity, just these words and ideas that were being shared for the first time. And as I started talking more with other people that I do this work with, there was definitely a deep sense of fear of what happens when that window closes. Like,
Yeah.
how much can we push through this window with this finite amount of time? And so I guess what I would say to someone who really did have like an awakening, who stopped listening to the white noise, who had one of these, like, I once was blind, but now I see racial injustice and I see my own complicity, my own silence, my own upholding, whatever. Um, I feel like it's a lot of um, what I keep coming back to is commitment. Like, I think you need to figure out where you were. All have like a before. Any convert. Like, I don't think, I think there are very few white people that don't have a before moment. Like, I think, um, in some way, and that could be, you could have had that before moment when you were 4 years old, and then 5 you started seeing the world through a racial, like, but you do have that moment. And so I think it's important doing some interrogating of, where were you, what was happening that kept you from seeing the world the way that you might be starting to see it, the way that you're starting to recognize injustice, the way that you are starting to get the sense that, like, oh my gosh, racism is the water. It's not the shark. Like, where were you and what's changed? Because you don't have control necessarily of like where you're going and what you do next, but you do have control over reflecting where you've been and where you are now. And so I would encourage people, before they sign up to, do something bold and big and whatever, like, to really spend some time doing some reflection. um for me, like, my big aha moment came on a trip called Sankofa, which is a Swahili word which means to look back in order to move forward. And so
Mm-hmm.
that was so important for my journey, and what I was looking back on was, the transatlantic transatlantic slave trade, and the civil rights movement, and all the things in America's history. But as I've gotten older and And even a lot of my book, it really starts out with me looking back to the family I was raised in, early racialized experiences, like going back and understanding them so that I can repent from them and heal from them and move forward, not living from a place of trying to atone for my past, or kind of operating out of like, here's my bleeding scars. Like I just
Yeah.
realized that there, all this is like part of my story or part of our collective being. But I'm here to help, but you're like bleeding on people. Like, no, like do some work of figuring, like, this work will be here tomorrow. Like it will be here in 5 years. And so you can take a little bit of time and reflect so that you are rooted in a place that is um that is the healthiest version as you kind of as begin. And it helps root you to your why. Like finding your why of this work, I think is really important. Like I think there's so many people are interested in the like, what should I do? Like, I mean, the big question is the
Yeah.
what. What should I be doing? I know
Hmm.
the when is now like urgent. I just figured this out. I just see it. Oh my gosh, like I'm
Yeah.
fired up. So the when, well, okay, the when is always going to be here. Like the
Yeah.
when will always be here, but you need to figure out your why so that when the when is here in 15 years, you're still anchored and rooted and showing up. And the people who are counting on you to show up, you're reliable for them. Like it becomes bigger than just like a personal individual like mission, right? It becomes,
Yeah.
oh, if I don't show up to this thing, like these people will um not like be mad at me, but like we're
Hmm.
doing this together. Because I think the longer you do this work too, it really does move out of the silo of you reading books by yourself or with a small group of people to like, yeah, you do begin to take action and you do begin to link arms with other people, and it becomes easier to be committed because you're in partnership and relationship, and that's easier to maintain. It's like having like a workout buddy. Like I will go to the gym if I know someone else is waiting for me there. I will not go if it's just my alarm and no one cares. Like, and that's just right. And I think the same type of mindset of the like, how do I stay committed in other areas of my life? How do I grow? How do I stay humble? Yeah, how do I infuse this into my family? Like, how are you doing that in other areas? I think sometimes with the issue of racial injustice, especially for white, we're like, oh my gosh, we have to like totally reinvent the wheel. And I would argue, oh no, like you're already talking to your kids about things that you believe. You're already making choices with how you spend your money. You're already voting. You're already participating in a faith or community group. Like there are so many choices and things that we're doing that keep us towards like fulfilling a vision of how we want to engage in the world. And this gets to be like baked into that. It doesn't have to be like siloed over here. Or else I really don't think it will take roots.
Yeah.
I don't think it's supposed to be shoved to the side.
Yeah. Who I'm sure you've learned from so many. I mean, I know you had a forward by Austin Channing Brown, which is amazing. Who are the people that have taught you who are experienced? I mean, this kind of work, we always want to center the people that are most oppressed by the oppression. And so, who have been your teachers that you would point us to as well?
Oh my gosh. Well, some of them like you can't find on the internet, but I will name them anyway because
Right.
they were really, important to me.
Yeah.
But yeah, I had professors in college. I had a professor of Africana Studies named Dr. Sims, and a professor of Africana Studies named Theodora I. Oat, and both of them from such a formative time in my life really helped me look at the world less from the like Eurocentric, white centric lens that I had been raised on and really introduced kind of like Afrocentricity and like what happens when you apply a different lens to reading the news, or what happens, it just um really, yeah, really helping me uh not like feel bad about the way I saw the world, but offered me, oh no, honey, like there's more than one, like there's more than one lens in which you can
Mm-hmm.
look through. And so that was vital. Austin Channing Brown, if you have not read her book, I'm Still Here, and I'm guessing you have.
I have. It's
Um,
amazing.
I would,
Mm-hmm.
yes, it's amazing. So I met Austin when she was 18 and I was 20. We met on the Sankofa bus trip that I
Okay.
mentioned,
Yeah.
and really had like an instant connection. Um I literally, like, I would need like another hour to name all the names, but I would just say Austin is an incredible resource. Um my friend Marcy Alvis Walker, who she has an Instagram account, Black Coffee with White Friends.
Oh,
She
yeah.
is like a beautiful, she is a self-professed, like not anti-racist educator, but she has a way of weaving history and theology and news and in just like a beautiful way. Um, oh my gosh. I mean, yeah, so many. I got to, through my relationship and friendship with Austin Channing Brown, we co-created and co-hosted a video web series together called The Next Question. And it's available on YouTube, Vimeo, wherever. You can go to our website, tnqshow.com. But we got to interview people like Nicole Hannah Jones, who has I mean, like, I feel like I had like a third conversion when I when I had a conversation with her. I mean, she is beyond, I mean, like Pulitzer Prize, New York Times journalist, who most famously now is known for her work with the 1619 Project.
Yeah.
But we actually interviewed her that summer right before it came out, before we even, knew
Wow.
about that work.
Yeah.
And but she has such rich research and storytelling on the American education system. She herself is a product of being bused. She's from Iowa, and when she was, I think starting in elementary school, was part of the integration of American schools, after Brown v. Board was Brown v. Board happens, but then like schools are still segregated. So one of the proposed solutions to that was like a forced busing system. And she just, yeah, she is, yes, a deep well of knowledge, and one of the literally just smartest people I've ever met. Um, I could email you a list, because I know I'm leaving out like 50 people right now.
Of course.
But I do think it is.
Yeah.
That was a really important aspect to me writing this book as a white woman, was really wanting people to understand that I'm not coming here with these discovering these things all on
Right.
my own, that
Right.
I almost like, because I'm a metaphor visual person, I almost kind of saw myself as like, oh, I just want to be like your on ramp to like, here's all these like amazing like ideas, and here's
Yes.
how I learned them from, and here's stories, but like always like on ramp to like, and be like, okay, bye, like,
Yeah.
have fun on the highway with like all these people that are that are the ones that I actually want you to be on the journey with. But like,
Yeah.
I think we all need to start somewhere. Um and I think, yeah, but if yes, the goal of my work is not for people to stay with me. It
Yeah.
is hopefully for them to be introduced to ideas and thinkers and activists that they then learn directly from, because
Hmm.
those are the people I'm learning directly from. So
Yeah.
thank you
No, it's an
for even
incredible way
asking that
to,
question.
yeah, it's an incredible way to use your privilege. I mean, I certainly, um, I understand that as a white woman, I often get asked by people like, why do you want to speak about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging? Kind of like, what do you know about that? And it's like, no, I know because I mean, I do have the experience of being a woman, and I do have the experience of being a minority overseas most of my life, but that's not why. It's because I want to promote the voices of those who maybe you're not going to interact with them, but you know me, and we're at this party together, but let me take you over here into this other room and introduce you over there. Yeah.
Totally. Well, and I think that's such a good point of the belonging to like a larger collective, right? Of saying like this work, I mean, this is why the title of my book is not like do everything, right? And like do, you know, be everything for everybody. Like that's
Right.
not what we are, that's like impossible. It's like that's not even lofty. That's just like that's that's bonkers. Like why that's not no one thinks they can be everything. Um but I think too often white people think I've not I who am I to do such and such?
Right.
And I what I hope that people understand is the like we have spheres of influence wherever we are. And to your point,
Mhm.
like if you're looking around a room and you're like, nobody is talking about this thing, but I'm somebody and I can talk and I
Yeah.
don't have to talk the whole time. And the goal
Right.
isn't for me to like, you know, but like I can say something to just introduce an idea or you know change the flow of this conversation or to shut something down
Yeah.
that is violating you know values or that is like that is racist or that has like inklings of racism even I think
Yeah.
that's often a really like oh wait was that like racist or wasn't and oh should I like say oh gosh it's like no like just do something like
Yeah.
every day. Like it
Yeah.
doesn't have to be huge. I mean, this is stuff I like literally say to myself all the time because the work is really overwhelming.
Yeah.
But if we say, "Oh, well, let's like let Austin take care of all of it." Well,
She
Austin's
can't.
not at my like school PTA meeting,
Right.
right? And she's not at like this meeting that I'm in with coworkers or she's not, you
Right.
know, so I think it's that tension of the, of course, I'm not like the only voice on this,
Yeah.
but I am a voice.
Yeah.
And so how do I use mine to like either amplify if that voice that I want everyone to be listening to is present, or how do I, you know, amplify in a different way by sharing the themes and the heart and the message of what that messenger is ultimately trying to say. Um, but yeah, I think just like completely letting ourselves off the hook because we are not who we wish was in the conversation or you know we're not the most ideal candidate is like well what else is new like I don't know like
Yeah, exactly.
you
No, I love
know
your
like we just
posture.
have to
Yeah, it's so good. And it's,
uh,
I mean, it definitely, it is the question. I think it's the elephant in the room. Like, why is a white woman doing this? I face that too. And I think that you make a good case as to why we are all needed in this work. But it's how we do the work
mm,
as white people. That's also, you know, a way that we center those who are most, affected by the oppression and their voices. And I think that you're doing that really well. And I'm just,
mm.
congratulations on that and on this book. I have it right here. It's so good. I'm so glad you
Oh
wrote it. And
thank you
but I do want you to
I know I
stick
have mine right here
around.
too
Okay. I do want
just
you
in
to stick
case
around for our
sometimes
Patreon
people are
supporters.
like oh yes but sometimes people are like so on 99 you say and I'm like what do I say on 91 what am I like where
Right.
like I don't remember.
Well, I want you to stick around and we're going to talk a little bit about that bus ride on our Patreon little segment here at the end. But thank you for this interview. And how can people find you and your book?
Yeah. So my website is jennyboothpotter.com, spelled Jenny, and then Booth Potter, like you would think. I'm on Instagram at Jenny, the letter B, Potter. Those are the two places that I hang out the most. I'm trying to figure out what to do about Twitter these days, but
Yeah.
I don't like Facebook. So Instagram is my jam. Come hang out with me over there. It'd be great.
Great. We'll link you in the show notes. Thanks for being with us, Jenny. It's been great to have this conversation with you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Lori. I've really enjoyed it.
Bye. What a challenging and sobering conversation with Jenny Booth Potter. Um, she does discuss more in detail on our Patreon, where we get to talk with her about a question surrounding, more deeply that bus ride that she took with fellow college students, including where she first really interacts with Austin Channing Brown. And I know many of you know and love her and what she has been writing about for years. And so check out the Patreon with her. That's going to be released to all of our Patreon supporters as an exclusive interview. But I do want to just point each of you listening today to her book about how doing nothing is no longer an option for her and no longer really an option for any of us when we completely understand really what's at stake. So Jenny's book really walks into that declaration that she made to her peers that was more than just the 7 words that she uttered on a bus. It was a vow. It was a lifetime commitment for her to seek racial justice and to use her privilege and her position to help others. And her book is full of humility. It's full of just candor. It's full of her sharing just her imperfect but relentless journey of growing in awareness around racism as somebody who began to reckon with her own white privilege and, didn't realize until she was an adult really kind of more what that was about, and that she could have grown up in the same area with very different perspective and experience with walking into the same places that her Black friends were walking into. And so she really takes us on a deep dive there. And I really do recommend her book. She has just such a great way of not only putting her own journey in there with great vulnerability, stepping into some of the shame that we don't talk about, stepping into that personal nature of it for herself, and some practical action steps of what we can do. Her book's about doing, but it's also full of grace, and it's full of compassion, self-compassion for herself, and compassion for all of us to do this journey imperfectly and to learn and grow together to make a difference together, which is what we're all about here. So I do recommend that you check out her book, Doing Nothing is No Longer an Option. And just to follow her and her writing, and then reach out to her. Follow her on her next question series, the web series about expanding our imagination for racial justice. She's also a founding partner of Herself Media, and that organization is aiming to create stories to empower and bring joy to Black women. She's doing some great stuff there in Chicago. So check out all of her stuff. She's on Twitter as long as that lasts. And she's continuing to write and speak and do good in the world. So join her, join all of us here on the A World of Difference podcast as we continue to try to make a difference together. And for those of you who are eating turkey this week, or vegetables, or those of you who are celebrating what we call in the United States Thanksgiving, or if you're taking a moment to just remember some of the hard things that have happened that surround Thanksgiving, or if your take on it is to just remember that it was Indigenous peoples here in North America that gave a meal to colonizers who showed up. And just understanding the narrative more deeply, I think, is something I would encourage any of us to do. When we lived in Singapore and our kids were little, we ordered a book for kids that kind of revisited what was going on in those early years and trying to help them understand that the story isn't something we should whitewash, but there's good and there's bad and there's nuance in that story. And so, just a quick Google search would help you know a little more if you've not dug into that before in your U.S. citizen. I do encourage it. And there's a lot of resources around the hashtag Indigenous Peoples Day that we kind of had just recently celebrated last month on October 12th. And a lot more resources coming out here in the United States. I recently bought the First Nations version of the New Testament, which is really exciting to read. And there's just more resources coming out from Indigenous theologians here in North America, both in Canada and in the United States. Some of our First Nations friends that are really writing and digging into some of the history and helping me see in new ways. And so, maybe just during your Thanksgiving holiday, and if you're tired of turkey and football, check that out. The First Nations New Testament, it's given a different lens, calling God creator and just kind of connecting us with the land in ways that we really should have stayed connected with all along, and understanding deeper that healing, our relationships with other human beings, our relationship with God, and our relationship with the land is sort of all intertwined. And our relationship with ourselves, just the embodiment of all of that. There's a lot that the First Nations version of the New Testament brings out, and some of the indigenous theologians are helping us see in a clearer way. So yeah, I encourage you to do that if you have some time over your Thanksgiving break. And in the meantime, I'd love to hear about it. So check us out on our Facebook group. We'd love to have you join there and interact with our episodes. We continue to have a little bit of issue with our Facebook page right now. There's all kinds of stuff going on with layoffs here in Silicon Valley with Facebook, obviously Twitter, and Amazon is laying people off. And so if you're one of the people that has recently been downsized, laid off, lost your job during this holiday time, let us know. We'd love to network with you. If we have people in the podcast community that are hiring right now, then I'd love to connect you to each other. And, definitely we would love to pray for you, but also our podcast this week is with a book called Doing Nothing is No Longer an Option. So in addition to praying, we would actually like to do something and help add to our thoughts and prayers resources to help you network. And if people know about jobs, to connect you with each other. Our Facebook group would definitely be a place for that, or in our Instagram comments. Feel free to let us know if you've recently been laid off and are looking for work, and if we can help you in any way in our podcast community to find a remote job somewhere in the world, maybe connected across countries. That's a possibility these days, and thank God for that. So yeah, hang in there. And if you have recently been laid off, I just want to say I'm really heartbroken that happened to you around this time with the holidays coming up. We realize that inflation is an issue, and hard decisions are having to be made. So it's difficult to walk through. But my experience has been sometimes just taking in a deep breath a couple of times, 3 times, in through our nose, out through our mouth, just like the Navy SEALs do. Taking a pause and a breather just to practice some self-compassion, bring people around you that will remind you of who you are. And hopefully sometime soon you'll find that next wonderful thing where you can contribute and be helpful. And in the meantime, all of you in the podcast community that are listening, if you're hiring, let us know, because we love to connect you with people who are making a difference too. In the meantime, thank you for listening. Thank you for the great work you're doing wherever you are around the world. And I hope you get a little bit of rest over the next few days, whether you're American or not. Thanksgiving can be a time, even if you're not celebrating it, to just be reminded we can be thankful for the air that we breathe and the life that we live and those loved ones around us, if we're fortunate enough to have them nearby. In the meantime, know that I care for you as you listen, and I care for the work that you're doing. And I would love to hear more about how that's working out wherever you are in the world, because I know so many of you are making a difference, and I really enjoy hearing about it. So let me know. And in the meantime, take care, take a deep breath, get some rest, and we'll talk again next week. Bye. As we're finishing this episode, if you're thinking, I really wish I could learn more or go a little bit deeper, well, that's what our Difference Maker community is for. I would love to welcome you in to join the rest of us there. Once again, it's only $5 a month to join, the price of a latte at your local coffee shop. You can join at our Changers tier. Difference Makers is a community that really means so much to me. It's very special because each time I have a guest on the show, I record something outside of what we give to just the regular podcast audience, where we go a little bit deeper. And then I post those video episodes in this community and we can discuss them. But also at the very beginning tier, which is our Changers tier of this community, you'll get exclusive voting power and help pick podcast topics that give us, more of what we want from your perspective. You'll have access to exclusive 30 plus mini-sodes that aren't out there for the general public. And you'll get every month an exclusive monthly bonus mini-sode. At our Groundbreakers level, which is $10 a month, you can join and get all of that, but also priority access to submit questions to the podcast. And you'll get an additional 2 exclusive monthly bonus mini-sodes. And at our Trailblazers tier, which is $15 a month, the price of 3 lattes a month, you can get all of that plus also 3 exclusive monthly bonus minisodes, and a patron shout out. So I would love for you to join us at any of those tiers. It'll help you come into this community, be in the midst of all of us, other difference makers, and we'd love to hear your perspective. I certainly would. It's a place to engage more with me and the audience around what you like, what you're resonating with, and once again, go deeper with each of our guests. So please join us in this membership community. I would love to hear your perspective and love to share this extra content with you. So show up at patreon.com/a world of difference.